Hello, it's time for Wednesday in the Word this week. Today our scripture passage is in Nehemiah chapter 1, and the final verse of that chapter, Nehemiah said, O Lord, I pray, please let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who desire to fear your name. And let your servant prosper this day, I pray, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer. Nehemiah was about to have a change in profession. He was a child of Israel who had been raised in position there under the Persians. Many of his co-Israelites had gone home. They had rebuilt the temple under the leading of Zerubbabel and Ezra. And these people were not out of the mind of Nehemiah. He thought about them. He was concerned about them and their welfare. In the earlier part of this chapter, you'll see that he asked, Lord, how are things going here? And he talked to others about it. How are things happening in the Lord's house? And they talked about the walls are burned down, that are broken down. They're in terrible shape. Well, that was a big thing in the days of Nehemiah. They needed to be in a place of protection. They needed to be in a place of safety. They would always have enemies who hated them and who hated the worship of the one true God. And this became a heart problem for Nehemiah. He was passionate about this. And I'm always excited to study Nehemiah because a couple of things always stand out to me. Number one, Nehemiah had no doubt been placed in this position of service to the king of Persia so that he might find this position of service with the Lord. All the way through our verse today, the servant, the servants, the servant. You see, no matter what his place was in the world, he always considered himself a servant of God, and so should we. And there was an important job that needed to be done. He could have made a lot of excuses. I'm really important here. I shouldn't go. Or, there's others that can do this. There's people that's already on the ground in Israel. Why would I go? But he didn't use any of those excuses because this burden that God had put on his heart was so strong. And he put in his mind, and he set in his mind, I must go before the king and share my burden with him. And I'm going to ask God to open that door for me. Well, he was a passionate man. He was a prayerful man. He was a man who God used as one of the heroes of the history of the people of Israel. He was a hero not because he was sinless. He wasn't. He was a sinful man. He was a hero because he walked and lived in faith. Regardless of what he saw before him, he felt the movement and the tug of God on his heart. And he allowed God to use him as God would use him. And probably Nehemiah would never have thought this will be my place. He more than likely thought, I'll spend my whole life here in Persia serving this king. And this will be the life that I live. But God opened this door and touched this man's heart. And this man, this bureaucrat, if you will, who had a heart for God, God took and he used. It reminds us of a scripture in Philippians 2:13. It is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. Don't ignore the leadership of God in your life. Have a great day.